My brothers and sisters across the continent of Africa, I have the honor to extend warm greetings and congratulations from the Caribbean community on this, the 63rd anniversary of Africa Day. The invitation received by the Caribbean community to participate in this celebration of Africa Day underlines the strengthening of relations between our community and Africa. This new dynamic is contributing to the creation of a space for engagement and exchange of views on our common destiny and our shared future. Our people want to work together. Our people want to trade together. And we do so because we share a common heritage. When I addressed the Ghanaian Parliament during my official visit last year, I informed the honourable members of that chamber that the relationship between our two countries was even stronger than simply being blood relatives. At the time of our first attempted slave revolt in our country in June of 1675, under the leadership of a man called Cuffy who had come from the Gold Coast, Barbados was actually an Akan-speaking nation. And even today, in our dialect, there are still some words that owe their origins to our early language, just as much of our culture in the Caribbean today is still rooted in the culture of Africa. As my brother, President Kenyatta, put it so eloquently during a historic visit to Barbados in August last year, the desire for common bonds is driven not only by the force of history, but the reality of today and the imperative of our future. This heritage has been highlighted by Pan-Africanism, which created strong bonds between the Caribbean and Africa, and indeed played a historic role in the fight against colonialism and the flowering of independence on both sides of the Atlantic, and might I say thereafter, equally in the fight against apartheid. These bonds have continued as we work together within the international fora, and we know them well: the United Nations, the Commonwealth, the Group of 77 Nations, and indeed the Organization of the African, Caribbean and Pacific States. Our countries are once again demonstrating the political will needed to advance these relations towards meaningful, strategic and long-term dialogue and initiatives for the benefit of both sides, for the benefit of our people. In this, we continue to work together, recently in the establishment of an Africa Group and CARICOM collaboration initiative at the United Nations in New York. Cooperation with Africa involves efforts to keep issues of mutual importance, such as climate change, and the United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, which affect the countries of the Caribbean and Africa in various ways on the international agenda. And we don't need to explain this to our people. For just as your citizens see how hurricanes affect us, or hear how we may be affected by droughts and the recent sargassum weed, our people have seen how hurricanes and storms and floods are affecting parts of Africa that hitherto were unaffected, and how droughts equally continue to decimate the ability of people to eat and to live in certain parts of the continent. Our heads of government agreed in principle last July to a proposal from our colleague Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Mr. Ralph Gonsalves, for the establishment of a permanent Africa-Brazil-Caribbean Diasporic Commission. We are working, therefore, to give life to that. Similarly, last November, in an effort to advance our relations, I officiated at the opening of a CARICOM office in Nairobi, Kenya. Unfortunately, due to the current global pandemic, the scheduled summit between CARICOM and the African Union that was to have happened in June next month has been postponed. We look forward to that historic event taking place at the earliest possible opportunity, for neither COVID nor history shall separate us from the united front that we can take for the benefit of our peoples. These links between our regions must therefore exist not only at the level of the state, but also at the level of non-state actors. The Caribbean Pan-African Network, headquartered in Trinidad and Tobago, and comprising membership from 17 Caribbean territories, views itself as a bridge between Africa and the Caribbean. At the level of academia, there are increasing ties between the University of the West Indies and many African universities. And indeed, a distinguished Caribbean Prime Minister, P.J. Patterson, has a center named after him in Jamaica, namely the P.J. Patterson Center for Africa Caribbean Policy Advocacy, and this is now a vibrant part of the widening network of our diverse relations. During this International Decade for People of African Descent, being led under the theme People of African Descent, Recognition, Justice and Development, we cannot underscore enough the significance of openly acknowledging and discussing our condition in a postmodern world. The current discord regarding race relations, the injustices of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance emphasize the indisputable gaps that still exist in the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms for all. Indeed, we view the decade not just as an opportunity to reflect on these injustices of the past, but as a platform to advance the Caribbean's call for reparatory justice to compensate for centuries of social and economic exclusion of people of African descent, which, my friends, regrettably persists until today. It also presents a unique opportunity to take steps towards changing the narrative to recognition and appreciation of the significant contribution of African descendants to today's global society. We all know that we have a weakened multilateral system, and the impulse of major individual countries to rush to look inwards in recent times, in these unprecedented times indeed, and to conduct themselves capriciously in their behavior towards weaker states, all of these give us cause for the Caribbean community and Africa to reach out to each other and to work together. We know that our world faces many challenges. And in this recent challenge of the global health crisis in the form of the novel coronavirus disease 2019, there's been a corrosive economic and social impact on all of our countries and our people. Indeed, it has brought out the best solidarity and equally the worst in us, selfish unilateralism. We have now to ask if this is the kind of international relations that we would wish for our global community. We in the Caribbean have argued that more than ever, there is a need for a global leadership initiative, not rooted only in the voices and powers of government, but also with those who have capacity to influence our people in how they behave, in how they react, in how they interact with one another, in what they say. Because it is up to us to root this global leadership initiative in the moral leadership that gives our individual citizens rights and opportunities that have been denied to them over the course of the last few centuries. The world, my friends, as we know it, is being upended. Our societies transformed by the need for different norms and ways of doing business as we respond to these various crises. And we in Africa and in the Caribbean, in my view, have a legitimate role to play in anchoring global leadership, in moral leadership. So my friends, let us have a voice in the international arena collectively as the world tries to find solutions to this crisis in a manner that does not leave those of us in Africa or those of us in the Caribbean behind. And let us also recognize that it is important 75 years after the creation of the United Nations and the Bretton Woods institutions to come together to determine how best we can refashion how they function and how they look, to ensure that we are not left out of the critical corridors of decision making so that our peoples have an opportunity to bring that moral leadership of which I spoke. And let us also recognize that at the time that the United Nations was formed, many of our states simply did not exist as independent countries. And therefore, the contemplation as to how and what the United Nations should do, or the Bretton Woods institution should do, in fashioning a world, did not take into account our existence and indeed our desires for a future that is reflective of an inclusive partnership with our people. Let us therefore this year, as we celebrate Africa Day, let it be a milestone on the road Yes to a CARICOM Africa cooperation, but not just simply for ourselves, but for the world. Let us show that the people of African descent can make a meaningful contribution to this world, and that indeed our experiences over the last few centuries prior to our becoming independent stand as a platform to give us the impetus to be able to show the world that there can be a better way, a more caring way, a more inclusive way, and one that does not reflect the manner in which our countries were taken advantage of, and worst of all, our people exploited to be able to ensure that others could become rich. We have a duty, we have a solemn duty to do right by our people. Let us, across CARICOM, across Africa, rise to the occasion and make life better for our people. But we can only do so through collaboration and cooperation rooted in common values. We look forward to building these common bonds because we know that what the world needs more than ever is the caring, compassionate view that is rooted in morality, that puts people at the center of all that we do, and that recognizes that for our people, their time has come to play their role yet again in the affairs of the global community. Let this Africa Day be that milestone for us to continue to imbue in our people that sense of confidence and that sense of commitment to the people of African descent. Thank you, my brothers and sisters.